We have a lot of news for you this morning. We'll begin with this, that President Trump is hailing an agreement between the leaders of North and South Korea in their historic summit. The president declared in a tweet this morning this: Korean War to end. He said Americans, quote, should be very proud of what is taking place in Korea.
North Korean leader Kim Jong-un and South Korean President Moon Jae-in pledged to remove nuclear weapons from the Korean peninsula. They also agreed to turn the demilitarized zone between their countries into a, quote, genuine peace zone and stop all hostile activities.
Kim started the summit overnight by crossing the DMZ into the south, the first North Korean leader to do that. The summit sets the stage for an expected meeting between Kim and President Trump. Michael Morell, CBS News senior national security contributor, is here with us again. He spent more than 3 decades at the CIA, becoming the director of intelligence, deputy director, and acting director. Also with us is CBS News military and homeland security analyst Sandy Winnefeld, a retired Navy admiral and former vice chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff. Good morning. So suffice it to say, we have the best people here with us in the morning to talk about North Korea. We are so glad, because there's so much to talk about. Let me start with you, Admiral Winnefeld. The news this morning, they're talking about the official end of the Korean War. What would that mean?
Well, first of all, I would tell you that Michael and I both last summer, when it looked like war was going to break out on the Korean Peninsula, we were saying, take a deep breath, everybody. It's not going to happen. Now that it looks like peace is going to break out on the Korean Peninsula, we're saying the same thing. This is a very positive step, but there's a long way to go to get where the peninsula needs to be to truly be a peaceful place.
Admiral, though, was the kind of over-militarization talk helpful in getting us to this moment? And is it, and will it be helpful going forward in terms of U.S. military activity around North Korea?
Well, you know, I think both sides were coming at each other, sort of talking past each other, and that we feel that, and to a degree are correct, that we put a lot of economic pressure and military pressure on North Korea to come to the table here. North Korea, as Michael pointed out earlier in the broadcast, said, you know, they're thinking, hey, we've got nuclear weapons now, and we're dragging the U.S. to the table. So both sides feel that they're there in a position of strength, and it's going to be interesting to see how this plays out.
So, Michael, what should the United States be looking for now? Because you look at the optics, they're both crossing back and forth, which, if, as a layperson, you're sitting watching saying, this looks very impressive.
What we have to do now is prepare the president for the summit with Kim. And to prepare him for that, you have to be very clear with the president. Here's what North Korea's objectives are, and here's how Kim is going to try to pursue them, and here's how you need to deal with that. So that should be the focus right now in the conversations with the president.
Can Kim Jong-un be trusted now? Should he be given the benefit of the doubt, both of you?
No. The Kim regimes, so 3 of them now, have shown over and over again a willingness to make an agreement and then either break that agreement or cheat on that agreement. So whatever we agree to, there's got to be a very tough verification regime.
The president has a new national security team just in the last month. He has a new Secretary of State. He has a new national security advisor. In the past, though, President Trump has said North Korea must scrap its weapons program before any relief of sanctions. Do you think he's going to be able to hold the line on that?
Well, I think that just what just happened was very clearly choreographed to try to set up a more gradual process where there may be some sanctions relief, there may be some compromises by North Korea on its weapons program. And I think the vital question will be whether President Trump can declare victory by still allowing Kim a little bit more time to get rid of his nuclear weapons program, if he's even willing to do that, while he builds confidence in the survival of his regime.
I was just there in June with President Moon, where he talked about these bilateral talks. But I think for us to remember, we have 30,000 U.S. troops there. We have a huge American commitment on the Korean Peninsula. What does it mean for them, those military families?
Well, I think even if there's a peace agreement, we will probably remain on the peninsula just to be a buttress for South Korea, to build their confidence that this is not a mirage, just as we have troops in Europe. And I think we will probably be on the North Korean or the Korean Peninsula for quite some time.
Mike, the Iran nuclear deal, critics of that said it didn't wipe out the Iranian program. They could still start it sometime in the future. Given the criticism of what people call half measures in Iran, how should we think about a deal that is likely to fall short of complete ending of all nuclear anything in North Korea?
So the Republicans, and I don't want to get political here, but the Republicans have been critical of the Iran deal, saying we didn't get enough for the leverage that we had, and we didn't include all the other malign activity on the part of the Iranians, right? We have the same issue here. When President Trump sits down with Kim, is he just going to talk about the nuclear issue, or is he going to bring up all the other bad activity that the North Koreans do, from cyber to assassinations of individuals outside of North Korea, to human rights abuses? Is he going to bring all those issues in as well?
To the death of Otto Warmbier.
Yes.
Right. I mean, the beating death of Otto Warmbier.
You know, there are two other things that came out of the actual communique that were interesting. One, they talked about unification, but no discussion of what that really looks like. And when you think about South Africa, all of the crimes that were committed by Kim, how does that get worked out? And the other thing is, there was a discussion about potential trilateral talks between the U.S. And North Korea and South Korea, or quadrilateral talks between the U.S., China, and South Korea. Doesn't say anything about Russia or Japan. And Japan especially is going to feel cut out.
Can President Trump claim credit here that we've gotten to this point so far?
I think he does get some credit. He's put unprecedented pressure on North Korea, both militarily and economically. By the same token, North Korea feels they put unprecedented pressure on us by achieving a nuclear weapons capability. But I would give the president good credit for placing that pressure on the North.
Thiel brings up an important point, because the South Korean foreign minister is giving Trump a lot of credit this morning. And it was Trump who said that the Obama administration's policy of strategic patience was a failure, and that it was time to actually begin these bilateral sort of negotiations. And that has brought us to this point.
Both North Korea and South Korea have a huge incentive, right, to get to the Kim-Trump summit. South Korea's incentive is they were deeply afraid that a military confrontation was going to break out. North Korea wants to get there because it wants to turn their nuclear leverage into sanctions relief.
And all of this very carefully choreographed goodwill that's been created over the last several months, beginning with the Olympics and ending up with this particular summit, is going to almost make that meeting between Trump and Kim a lock.
Who has the upper hand in that meeting, going into the meeting now?
That's going to be a very interesting question. I do think that if President Trump doesn't hear what he wants to hear and he walks away, he's going to have to do it gracefully and return to the status quo rather than threatening to use force even more robustly.
The best outcome of a Kim-Trump summit is a set of goals and objectives for further talks by lower-level officials. The worst outcome is that those talks between Trump and Kim break down, right, and end in a not positive way. Then where do you go after that?
All right, Michael Morell, you have the last word. Admiral Winnefeld, always good to see you. I think Nora said it best. We have the best people at the table for this topic. What are you all, experts or something? Thank you very much.
With like decades of experience.
That's right. Thank you very much. Bill Cosby.